Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decentralize This, where we talk about all systems decentralized or whatever else we want to talk about that's tangentially related to that as well. We a lot of the times cover crypto markets, but we also sort of cover events that affect crypto markets and affect the macroeconomic situation in general. And there's been a lot going on, Doug. The last episode that we had, we talked quite a bit about media becoming decentralized, where some of the large mainstream media pundits like Don Lemon, who, by the way, since he left, we have not heard a single peep out of. He
Yeah,
got
he's been
fired.
quiet.
He's been very quiet. He got fired, and Carlson got fired. Now, of those two people, Carlson sort of has reemerged. He put up a tweet the other day, a video the other day on Twitter, yesterday, I think, really, where he said that he's going to do his show. Essentially, I think this is kind of what he said. He is going to do his show on Twitter from now on. I think there may be some legal issues here because he has a non-compete with Fox News, and he's still under contract with Fox News. So this may actually get nasty, in terms of like a legal battle that's brewing here soon. And whether that does happen or doesn't happen or not, but uh, he is coming to Twitter, and it seems like that might be some sort of a signal about what we talked about before as well, which is that media, is continuing to decentralize, and you may even have left-wing people starting to come on Twitter soon with their own shows, sort of just following what Carlson is doing, because he could have gone to YouTube and done it over there. He could have gone to Rumble, which is a kind of right-wing conservative,
Hmm.
alternative to YouTube and social media. But instead, he chose Twitter, which in the last year or so since Elon Musk took over, he's been trying to brand it as the last place you can go where free speech is not censored. At least that is sort of Elon Musk's marketing right now of Twitter. Uh, Whether you agree or not is sort of almost subjective at this point. What do you make of Tucker Carlson going to Twitter, starting a new show over there? What is your knee-jerk reaction? What is your insight there?
Yeah, I guess like a little bit of footing to that. Moved into a new spot, start of the year, and then just got busy with work and life. But the last month, I finally got like real furniture and stuff in, and I got a smart TV. And yeah, I'm like you, I'm pretty agnostic to the news. Like even Twitter, I try to keep it bay. But with that said, it's a smart TV, and then it comes with a Bloomberg TV, so it's
Mm.
like okay, this is still kind of like we said, there's CEOs on there. They give them their 90-second talk. It's like oh, I don't know, like obviously I think Coca-Cola is going to do well. It's like, well, no shit. You're CFO of Coca-Cola. Like, you're going to think it does well. But anyway, I'll be watching that before work and stuff. And this morning, or I'm off today, went to the gym. I was just making breakfast and I was watching it. And same thing on the side panel, they had, like the upcoming stuff and just little headlines that they wanted to talk about but didn't get to. And I saw one thing that something, there was rumors that Tucker was going to go on Rumble,
Mm.
and I guess they had backers or just other party interests, this, that, and a third, and something to the tune they lost like almost 400, well, lost $400 million just from it. So obviously, like we said, Tucker is a name brand, whether you like him or not. You say Tucker Carlson or Don Lemon, people know in 2 seconds who you're talking about. And with all that said, I think obviously anything from even if Noster wanted to get him, Rumble, name your up and coming hot platform right now. Like you said, in the last year, whether or not it's perfect is a whole nother discussion. But there's obvious evidence that Elon is trying to turn Twitter into just the public square. Because I've had talks with people. Obviously, like libertarian people go, oh, Twitter's a private company; they can do what they want, which is true. But I've had with some lefty friends in town or back home, I've had this debate with them. Okay. For example, if I just say Nike, like who's a competitor, people go, oh, Adidas, Van, Reebok. You can name a couple companies. I say Twitter, who's their competition? It's like even like Apple kind of has, like Android, Google Pixel, etc. But they're basically in a a vertical of their own. So the like you said, in the last year, Elon's come on. He's basically tried to turn it back into the public square because though it's a private company and it is an app and it's a lot of vaporware, and especially in our own little sphere, the crypto community, we don't act like intellectuals all the time. It's basically the in 2023 the best version we have of the public town free speech, like I said. So the fact that Elon's trying to rebrand that, refurbish that, whatever you want to slap a title on, and the fact that Carl goes there, um I want to say it's virtue signaling, but obviously, like apparently Elon, like we said, now is on the right, and the fact that Carl gets clipped from Fox, or they have a mutual departure, and he goes to Twitter, and being Twitter apparently now is the next safe space for the Republicans, people on the right. I didn't when I saw it, I didn't find it. How do I word this? Let's say if Don Lemon was like, "Oh, I'm going to go to Twitter," that would have surprised me way more than the fact that Tucker made this move. So I wouldn't say I would have called it, but it definitely didn't surprise me, like we said, because Twitter is apparently turning conservative now, and and like we said, Elon's trying to turn into the public square. So it didn't really surprise me a ton.
Yeah, it's surprising how he's been labeled as a right-wing person. Like I don't think that he is at all.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not like some big Elon super fan. I mean, I think he's a pretty great entrepreneur. He's set up multiple companies, and from my own crypto sort of stance, I don't like that he's a giant promoter of Dogecoin.
Yeah.
And he seems to say things about crypto occasionally that, like, dude, I mean, I don't think you actually understand like the whole like point behind this, right? A decentralized sovereign self-custodial monetary network is what Bitcoin is, and you're talking about other things, right? So there's things that he says that I don't agree with, but I think a lot of people on the left, they just like to put people into boxes. It's like, oh, he said something I
Mm-hmm.
don't agree with, or he said something that might have been interpreted as being anti-science or anti-Biden or whatever, and therefore he's a right-wing person, right? And I think unfortunately the mainstream media as well sort of picks up on that narrative. One of the ways that I started thinking about, and this is something that I started thinking about since our last podcast where we talked a lot about decentralized media, is that the mainstream media has essentially become a spokesperson for their respective political parties. It is no longer
Mm-hmm.
really a free media or a fair media because they're not really antithetical to power structures. They're not trying to bring down power structures or hold truth to power, whether it's Fox News that takes their orders from literally Rupert Murdoch. I mean, he's probably on the phone telling, anchors what they can and can't say, or whether it's, whatever left-wing equivalent of Rupert Murdoch there is in MSNBC and CNN. They all have their marching orders and their talking points, and,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that it's free is really just quite laughable. And you could just turn on any sort of international news media like the BBC, or like some European English speaking channel like DW from Germany. Not, of course, that they are perfect by any means at all, but there's so much of a difference in just the tenor of the news when it's told
Mm-hmm.
on those organizations versus CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever. So these news organizations have really just become power structures unto themselves, or just sort of attached to the hip of power structures that exist, here in the U.S. And Twitter, I think, is trying to position itself as the anti-establishment sort of theater. Is that okay? We are not for the current power structure. We are, against the current power structure. And it's telling that Carlson decided to go to Twitter to do his show versus going to Rumble, right, which was his right-wing sort of media. It was a match made in heaven. If he just went to Rumble, it would have made perfect sense. But I am wondering if he's doing it because he does not want to be pigeonholed into a box, like, oh, I'm the right-wing person now, and he maybe
Mm-hmm.
just wants to do his own thing, because he has been sort of critical of the Republican Party, even in the personal communications that's been sort of leaked by Fox News. He's been very critical of the people who promoted the January 6 riots, insurrection, whatever you want to call them, privately, even though he sort of did give airtime to the allegations, about the Dominion election voting systems, right? So it's really, I think, sort of telling that Twitter has sort of emerged as the anti-establishment kind of apparatus. The other thing I think about as well is, if I'm being cynical, is that if Elon Musk is the biggest, Twitter person, and he owns Twitter as well, he also, as a result of that, gains a lot of political power. If his company, which is now
Mm-hmm.
private, is now the place that people go to get, things that are anti-government or anti-establishment, or where breaking news is really discussed by movers and shakers, that also gives him a lot of political power. If he, decides, oh, I think this actually is something that we have to ban, or this is something that I'm not going to ban, I'm going to allow. He, it's a private company. He can do that if he wants to. He's not really beholden to some sort of constitution or something, right? Where people can take him to court and say, well, you struck down content and you've violated terms or services, right? I mean, he can just create his own sort of censorship criteria, unfortunately. And I'm sure that something like that will happen eventually. And, he may end up becoming the same sort of animal that he's trying to slay, which is usually how these
Mm-hmm.
things work out. Do you think
Yep.
there's a danger of something like that happening, where Twitter just becomes another establishment thing? Or is there just going to be so many voices that come in that it's going to be just very difficult to put Twitter in a box the way that I'm sort of describing that it might turn out to be?
I think it could turn to both. One thing I told you ever since I got in the crypto space, I've definitely had an appreciation for, let's just call it, old school classic books that maybe in high school I thought were stupid. For example, Frankenstein, Be Careful of the Monster You Make, it eventually comes back and eats you, The Lord of the Flies, Animal Farm, etc., etc. With that said, yeah, I'm like you. I'm agnostic to Elon. I think he's goofy, and then he did a lot of the Doge stuff. And then when that was popping off 2 years ago, I had a couple dozen buddies hit me up, and they're like, "Well, Elon's a tech guy. Of course he's in Doge. How could this not work?" And then I gotta, give him the whole, rice and beans behind that shit. But with that said, I think he's trying to shake up Twitter. Everyone, I even had some liberal buddies that are like, "Yeah, Twitter is just basically an echo chamber on an echo chamber." So he's trying to mix it up. In 5 year hindsight, we're gonna figure out if it works. But to your point too, I got some, friends or just even, people in the meetup who are, like Isaac, like God bless his heart, but they're Tesla, Elon heads or whatever. And, he's a smart dude. I think he means well, but the road to hell, the reason they say it's paved with good intentions is because it fucking is. It's like, even if he tries to do well, this shit could turn into a Frankenstein and flip 8 ways backwards on us. With that said too, power corrupts absolutely, or absolute power corrupts absolutely. You put anyone from Jordan Peterson to, your aunt's dog in a position like you said where he's the town square and he's the king that stands in front of the gate with a gold bucket collector or a bucket to collect gold coins. That's going to go to anyone's head. So to your point, a lot of people are like, oh, he's trying to turn this into the new public town square. It's like, well, cool, but if that does get accomplished and he's the whatever his title is right now, but he's owners just the poster child at Twitter, basically, like you said, there's a lot of political power that comes with that.
Yeah.
And I know I always quote Frontline a lot, but they make so many goddamn good documentaries. I think it's a 2 hour episode, Frontline on Amazon. And one thing they talk about, even though, Jeff Bezos made a really powerful company. The first 10 years was eating, dog shit and Twizzlers, and it basically turned into the economy. The problem with that is, too, for lack of a better word, it goes to people's heads. And, he bought out the Washington Post, which was failing, but obviously that gained him a lot of political power. But one thing he also did, I forget the mansion, but he bought a big ass mansion in D.C. and spent like a couple $1 million refurbishing it. Well, he doesn't live there. What did he do?
A
He
lot
basically
more
turned it
than,
into an entertainment center.
yeah, a lot more than a
Yeah,
couple million.
yeah, you know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. Yeah. So it's like, well, why do he do that? It's like, well, he owns the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Amazon's becoming the economy. Every time you turn on CNN, they're talking about tax the rich, break up Amazon. So when he goes to DC every 3 or 4 months, he wants a place to entertain, wine and dine
Yeah.
people, and cozy up to them. So long-winded thing to your point, it's yeah. I mean, I'm agnostic to Elon. I would say I'm maybe like 70-30, like he's an okay guy. But to your point too, it's like everyone's kind of thumping right now that Twitter is becoming the public square. Tucker's coming there. Well, it's like a lot of things: 9/11, Patriot Act, '08. COVID shutdowns, and 5 years we might be like, oh, this was the worst fucking idea ever. So I'm like you, a lot of people are chanting this right now, but I'm like, okay, guys, like it's a long runway. We're in the first inning. Let's kind of put the brakes on this.
Yeah, I agree. It will be very interesting to see what kind of content he comes out with once, I'm talking about Tucker Carlson now, once he actually gets started. I would not be surprised to see a lawsuit also in the works. once he starts getting going because he is still under contract. So I think that'll probably turn ugly. And I'm sure, Tucker is smart enough to reframe whatever lawsuit arrives as, all they're trying to silence me, right? Because I'm just so, important, and I have so many gold nuggets to tell you all about. I'm sure he's very cynically going to, act as if the lawsuit is all about just being censored, right? Whereas, honestly, he's in a lot of trouble. I think one of the reasons that, one of the things people don't talk about, people have reframed his firing as well. They, he's just, uncontrollable, and he just says it like it is. And I'm not, by the way, a Tucker Carlson fan at all. I honestly think the guy's a snake in the grass, to be honest. I think he's a very, very cynical person. He's reinvented himself when it's convenient for him, and I just don't think he's a very consistent person. But I think what will happen is there's going to be a lawsuit, and he's going to try to frame that as perhaps a mechanism of censorship, and then he may just start doing podcasts with other people. If he wants anything to say, he'll just get on somebody else's podcast and say it, and Fox News can't stop him, because what are they going to stop him from speaking in public? I mean, that's not part of the contract, I'm sure. So it'll be very interesting to see if he gets even more sort of out of the box and anti-establishment once, now that he's not under contract, he's not shackled to Fox News anymore. And also importantly, if he's going to get as big an audience, or he's going to become as big a newsmaker, right? So one of the ways that Trump became so prominent and got to the position that he got to eventually was Twitter. He was just so big on Twitter that he ended up basically becoming president. There was some article that I read that he saved billions of dollars of advertising money because of the shenanigans he was able to pull off on Twitter.
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, because he would say something, and then the whole news cycle would be about him. And I'm kind of wondering if Carlson, Carlson, I think, is a lot smarter than Trump is when it comes to manipulating the media. And now that he's independent of Fox News, it'll be interesting to see if he's going to leverage the many things that he's learned over 20 years of broadcasting to raise his profile even more, and if he's going to now turn this into some sort of a political play. Would not be surprised if at some point in time, Tucker decides to run for office, whether that's the presidency itself. He would actually get a lot of votes, in my opinion, or if it's a Senate seat or something like that. I don't think he would settle for anything less than the presidency or the Senate seat, but it'd be interesting to follow. But anyway, we can move on to the next topic here that we wrote down. Today was the CPI print. And the CPI is coming in a little bit, actually, it's coming in mostly in line with expectations, right? So I know that you don't have a lot of confidence in the actual CPI model. So what do you what do you make of the number coming in? I think the headline CPI number was 4.9. The expectation was 5.0. So it came down just like a hair underneath the expectations. All the other numbers were in line with expectations. Although at the same time, the labor or the jobs market data came out a few days ago as well, and that actually was showing a beat. There's unemployment is at a historic 50-year low. So you put these two numbers together, the unemployment rate remains high. The unemployment rate remains extremely low. Inflation seems to be going lower. So, Doug, is it time for me to start celebrating? Is the bear market over, and are we out of the woods yet, or not?
Nah, like I told you, one thing at the meetups, man, when people start quoting numbers from these institutions, I just laugh. I'm like, y'all really believe this? I mean, like, for example, man, like part of the reason, I mean, like this kind of hit home with you, part of the reason like the food pyramid is the way it is, and a lot of like research, like a lot of stuff says no fat on it. The sugar industry, I forget there's a higher organization, but the Hershey's, the Mars of the world, they have this organization, and they basically pay scientists to like give them data and studies they want. Because again, if Coke's going to fund a $2 million research, you bet your ass they're going to want to get results that helps their bottom line. And with that said too, it's like, man, if like you and I talk about this, I think part of the reason, again, I'm not a violence dude, but I think part of the reason a full Versailles has not happened in America since 2008 is like we talk about this. And like I said, Sunday I was out with a buddy, but I went out with Rob real quick, and him and I have kind of been having non intentional, but like 3 4 part like political conversation the last couple times we've seen each other. But one thing I do agree with him, you know, obviously he's like a, I would say like a classic liberal, classic progressive. Part of the reason a lot of social movements don't actually work or shit gets done is just because people are just drowning with like work, kids, life, can barely pay bills, got 2 or 3 jobs. And the reason I say that, I think, like I said, part of the reason since '08 shit hasn't gone full Versailles and heads have been on stakes. Like you and I know this, like, you know, you and I are by no means like economic. We cannot hang with the Peter Schiffs, the Lynn Aldens, the Charlie Mungers of the world. But like you and I, compared to most people, we're intellectual financial titans, which is not good. Like if I'm, you know, up in the 5, 10, 1% of just bullshit economics 101, that's not good because, like I said, I did not count myself anywhere close to an intellectual.
Same.
So I guess that, like I said, you know, I don't count any of these numbers. Like I said, you can just do some basic stuff. Oh my God, I'm blanking on the website right now, but it's the equivalent of like the Plan B stock to flow. You can take from the Paul Volcker days, just type in certain CPI information and it'll give you, and like we're easily at 10, 12, 15%. And like I was telling you, I saw a while ago that episode with Peter Schiff. Not only is there the inflation, there's core inflation, and now they have something called super core inflation, which is basically just gerrymandered hell and back just to give you a satisfying number. Um, and like same thing too, you know, like okay, what did the print come out at today? It was 5.6 or 5.5%.
I think the CPI was 4.9. The expected was 5.0. I think that was the CPI print. Now, there's a whole bunch of these prints, right? So
That's what I mean. There's like 6, you know. That's my point. It's like they
yeah,
have like 20 moving targets, so eventually shit hits something on the wall, you know.
yeah. You know, it's one of those things. You know, I follow a lot of like these financial blogs. Like for example, the Compound is one, and you know, Blockworks is another one, and I even like listen to Bloomberg as well quite a bit. And you know, one of the things I've learned from following all of these, you know, so-called experts is just how impossible it has been to really have any kind of a thesis that makes sense anymore. You know, the system has been so perverted. You know, it's you know,
Mm-hmm.
with interest rates, you know, historically low, and then they viewed as historically high, raising of rates, and everyone's forecasting a catastrophic recession, which everyone is saying is right around the corner, but then the employment numbers are looking pretty good. But then on the other side, you know, you look at some different metrics, you're going to think where, you know, the zombies are about to come, you know, tomorrow. You know, so it's just so confusing to me. I really, you know, one of the things the Compound, you know, folks have said is that there has never been a more confusing time to be in the markets. You know, these are like the
Yeah,
actual
for
financial
real.
planners, and I like to think I'm well informed. And you know, the only thing all of my, you know, reading has gotten me, and all of the attention that I put into, you know, looking at the markets and looking at the macro, the only thing that that has accomplished has made me more confused.
Yep,
So
no, for real.
I'm like, okay, now I really don't know what to think at all. I don't know if you know, this is now the bottom is already in terms of this, not just, you know, a crypto market, but all markets, or if a catastrophe is about to come, and in the midst of that catastrophe, crypto is going to be like a lifeboat that, you know, gets us to safe harbor, or if that's just a pipe dream, what's going to happen with regulations in crypto, what's going to happen with the debt ceiling. You know, this is probably a good time to talk about the debt ceiling as well. Um, this has been something that is really, I mean, I'm, you know, really getting bothered by the fact that we're here, right? Like Janet Yellen told us a
Again,
few weeks ago that the U.S. Treasury is going to run out of money in early June. All right, now that is about 3 weeks away that we're going to run out of money. Now imagine, you know, you're running a huge ass business that employs millions of people, and your accountant comes and says to you, hey, boss, we're going to run out of money in 3 weeks or in a month or whatever. We need an all hands on deck meeting to figure out what we're going to do, because, you know, once that red line is passed, um, there's going to be economic catastrophe. Our company is going to go bankrupt, and the world will come to an end. And this is probably the most important thing that, you know, we should be focusing on. And all I'm seeing from Washington is posturing from both sides,
mm-hmm.
and it's just very frustrating. You know, it's as you may have already heard, the cost to insure U.S. Treasuries now, the amount of money that it takes, the credit default swaps as they're called, the amount of money you have to pay to buy insurance on a U.S. Treasury, which is supposed to be, they teach us in economics school, a risk-free investment, right? The amount of money you have to pay for Treasuries for the U.S. For U.S. bonds is higher now than the amount of money you have to pay for defaulting on Brazilian debt or Mexican debt now. It's higher, which is just a really disturbing statistic to learn about. Like, oh, you would be safer buying Brazilian bonds, right? Sovereign bonds at least that's what the insurance, rates are telling us, than U.S. Treasury bonds. And all we're getting from our politicians is posturing. They're both, the both sides are digging in their heels. Biden is like, I want a clean debt ceiling increase. The Republicans are basically saying, go fuck yourself. And that's where we are 3 weeks out. And it just makes me really, it really pisses me off. It's like, you guys have one job, it's like to sit down, negotiate, to just, just keep us above water, don't crash the economy just because you're not willing to negotiate and cross party lines. I don't know, man. I mean, this just pisses me off. I don't know if you had any other thoughts. Are you just numb to this bullshit now? Or, do you get riled up like I'm getting riled up? Or are you just like, whatever, that maybe it'll get fixed. They're never going to default. I don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to default? Is that even a possibility in your opinion?
Again, he's kind of like a ghost in the closet. I quote him a lot, but with the Peter Schiff, I think trying to take a step back here. So I guess with this whole debt ceiling debate, the biggest thing is, okay, we need to, I guess like we said, a lot of the posture in DC is, hey, we need to raise the debt ceiling so we don't default, right? Well, then you have to define the word default, and you can make an argument, I'm blanking out now, 71, 72, we went off gold. You can make an argument we defaulted then, and then it's like after 2008, and then, the last fucking 36, 48 months, it's like, you're really going to look me in the face and say, oh, this is going to be the straw that makes us default. And I think I brought this up a couple weeks ago, and I redid the math on it because I remember I was saying it and I wasn't getting it right. So remember how like we talk about after you get past like even a million, but you get past a billion, people's brains can't wrap it. So like we're at what, 31.2 trillion, and I think the Democrats want to raise it by 1.5 or 2 trillion. So basically we'll be at like 33, 34 trillion, right? So a million seconds is basically about 3.5 days. A billion seconds is basically about 3 months, and then you get to a trillion seconds, and it's basically 30,000 years. So like the thing is, it's not linear. It's like, but like the thing is, like we're talking about like the dawn of man, caves. Like I don't even know if language was around. I think even the Sumerians were like what 10,000 years ago, or like you get, but like it's a number that you can't even wrap your fucking head around. So I'm like you. It's like you guys have one job, act like adults. I know we talked about this in one of the first episodes. Obviously, they use this debt ceiling, whichever party is in power, whichever one they're grabbing for the the slick straw. They use it as a stick and carrot. And obviously, the Republicans, they raise the debt ceiling 2 or 3 times. You might have to correct me under Trump, but like now it's just their man's not in the hot seat, so they're acting like the poor victims when they raise it under Bush too, most likely. So I know we were talking about that, but but the whole reason I bring all this up, it's like I'm like you, I'm partially disappointed, but I'm kind of laughing or I'll cry because part of me too is like, okay, they should do the right thing and make sure we don't default because, like you said, then that the U.S. gets a cold, the rest of the world gets pneumonia. But it's like also too, they shouldn't print the money because that's more fiscally irresponsible after all the bullshit we did over COVID. But the third thing on top of that, it's like 31, 35 trillion. No one can tell you the difference. So part of me is like, fuck it, just raise the debt limit. And like this is another funny thing too. They go, we're raising the debt limit. We're not going to print any more money, but we need to raise the debt limit to pay our bills. And it's kind of like someone saying, oh, I can't pay off this credit card. Let me get another credit card to pay off this credit. So it's just the cycle continues. So it's weird. Like I said, I know I went like 20 different directions there, but part of me is like, they should do the responsible thing and raise it, but it's also irresponsible to raise it. But like I said, at this point, if we're at 32, 34 trillion, we're never paying that off anyway. So it's just like money prints their own bird, just send it,
Do you think the U.S. government could actually default Do you think that's possible now? And like the reason I bring that up is because people have said, well, the U.S. government has actually never technically defaulted; they've always paid their
Yeah.
debts. But how many things that were never supposed to happen have happened in the last 5 or 6 years? Do you remember when Trump started campaigning? I remember very vividly. People were like, oh, whatever, like he's never going to win, right? And then the pandemic happened, and they were like, people would have never imagined that the government would force everyone to stay indoors, right? I mean, they did that in China. They did some very draconian things in Australia, New Zealand as well.
Mm-hmm.
People would have never imagined that you needed to have a vaccine before you could get on an airplane. Even today, by the way, you can't enter the United States unless you're vaccinated, even though the WHO has, officially said the pandemic is over, right? So, just the list of things that could have never happened uh, did happen, right? And you could even put like banking failures on that list as well. Like no one would have expected 4 or 5 banks to fail in a matter of weeks, and yet it did happen. No one would have thought that interest rates would go up as fast as they did, and then it did happen. No one would have
Yeah.
thought that an ex-president was going to be arrested and criminally charged, and then it did happen, right? And the list goes on. And so maybe we should add the default of the U.S. Government as one of those things that people says, well, well, this never happened before, so we're all worried about nothing. We only have to figure out what's going to be negotiated. My only concern is that they've left it too late. They've only started talking now, right? I mean, yesterday was the first meeting between McCarthy and Biden, and we're 3 weeks out, right? And so what happens if they don't come and with a deal? I mean, so I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where like, well, a meteor is never going to hit us and destroy civilization. And then it finally does, and the thing you thought was impossible seemed inevitable. I mean, let me put it this way: if the U.S. does default and the economy goes into a tailspin, and our credit rating goes to the toilet, and suddenly U.S. Treasuries are just toxic trash. Then in retrospect, people will look at it and like, well, of course, that was inevitable. Look what the US government was doing the last 5 years. How could you have thought that it was not going to happen, right? It's one of those things with Blue Swan, events, even though this is not going to be a Blue Swan event, sorry, a Black Swan event, is once it happens, it just looks so obvious that, oh shit, like, why
Mm-hmm.
didn't we see that, coming before it came? And I kind of feel like if the U.S. defaults, it'd be like, oh, well, duh, of course it was going to default. They started negotiating 3 weeks before. What else did you expect to happen? So what is your gestalt here? Because this actually could be like one of the most consequential things to happen since the last consequential thing to happen, right? Uh,
Well, I was gonna say, like you said, even in the last like 36 months, let alone the last 6 years, between like, long story short, I saw a good meme the other day, and like it's just a meme, but it's kind of true. It's basically, it was like 2130. It was a guy all cyborged out. He was bloody. Like you could tell, like there was like apocalyptic war in the background. He has his gun, and his son's next to him, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's like, "Dad, when did it all go wrong?" And he like takes a drag. He's like, "2016, we killed that goddamn gorilla." Because it seems like ever since Harambe, bro, shit has just gone weird, like you said, from Trump on. But like I saw that meme the other day. But I mean, no, like on a serious note, to answer your question too, I again, like I quote a lot of 2008, but when Hank Paulson was in, long story short, I think from basically when they first started doing just the prints to start saving out these banks or whatever, to when they got like deals done, like we said, they pulled all the CEOs together and then basically forced them to take the money. It was something like 3 weeks or whatever, and it was Nancy Pelosi, and I'm forgetting the other. I think he was the minority whip at the time.
Harry Reid, I
But in
think.
the documentary, I think, yeah. So thank you. But basically, Hank Paulson and Bush and all them get together in a room, and they're like, "Hey, we have 72 hours to figure this the fuck out, or like the U.S. economy is going to implode." And then, like we said, it contagions everywhere. And they go, "Why are we talking when we have 72 hours when this has been going on for?" Because at that point, I think Bear Stearns, I think Lehman has started to take on water. But it's like you said, and then in hindsight, everyone's like, "Oh, we should address this months ago." And this goes back to the thing where it's like, are these idiots? People like wonder. A couple of my buddies nobody's seen the podcast. And he's like, why do you keep referring to them the monkeys in DC? And this proves my point. I'm like, do any of these look like competent people? And whether you want to call it malice, stupidity, but it's like, do they look like representatives, civil servants of the people? Like, fuck no. And it's just the same thing too. It's like with like we talk about the U.S. dollar, why they're going to default nominally, or we're going to default basically just through inflation and just printing our debt away. But it's the same thing too. It's like, even if we raise the debt ceiling, that's not a good thing either, like I said. But it goes back to my thing too. It's also 34, 32, 34 trillion. No one knows the difference. But I mean, it's a weird one. Part of me is like, this is just political theater, but like we said, these are also children, and like you said, 3 weeks goes by really fucking quick in DC. Nothing moves
Yeah.
quick there. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm like you. I don't even want to think about it. But God forbid, June 1st, we default. I mean, could stock market see a 20% day? Could we break all the circuit breakers? Could crypto do a 40% haircut? It's like, we kind of laugh about it now, but we could be talking June 10th, and it's like, all right, guys, Bitcoin's at $10,000. Doug gets some beer, so we're kind of laughing about it now. But like you said, it could go Mad Max quick.
Well, you raise an interesting point. So let us assume that a default does occur, right? The U.S. defaults. Do you think crypto is coming down too? Or I should say, do you think
Oh,
Bitcoin is
easy,
coming down
yeah.
too?
Yeah, like even as like the residential, Bitcoin maxi of the group, it's just, I still don't think we are at that point where, like for example, let's say with default shit gets a little bit Mad Max, 30-20% haircut on everything. Maybe 5 years, 7 years down the road, if like, let's just pick a number, 1 in 10, 1 in 20 Americans is really exposed to Bitcoin, this could kind of be like a break the glass moment. But it's kind of like, a lot of people, meet someone that's really fit and you talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, 4 or 5 years ago I had like a heart attack, or I fell down some stairs and broke a foot, and I was like, man, I need to get my fat ass in shape. This could be that thing. But that's my point too. We're having this conversation right now, and I might go out later, shoot some pool with some buddies. None of them are aware of this shit right now. They're trying to hook up with some girl. They're checking their fantasy team. They're looking at new rims for their car. They're like, that's the thing. Like, we're in this, so we think everyone else is like aware of it.
Yeah.
But I like, as much as I would want Bitcoin to still be that lifeboat, I just think enough Americans still aren't aware. And unfortunately, it could take a real, like we said, a black swan event like this for people to wake up finally.
Yeah, it is kind of sad, that you're absolutely right. Like a majority of people are not really thinking about, like, what is money, and is our monetary system being debased? You could easily afford to ignore this in the 80s and the 90s and even like the 2000s, right? Because there was really no content. There was no Bitcoin. China was still not really, any kind of a remote threat at all. And of course, the Soviet Union had collapsed as well. So there was really no competition that the U.S. had at all. They even in as 1990, the first Gulf War happened, and the U.S. demonstrated. I remember I was living in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I remember when the Gulf War happened, one of the things that was really revealing to everybody at the time was how the U.S. had these precision weapons where they could actually cause a bomb to land exactly in a certain spot. They had these precision guided missiles, and CNN was covering them all the time, and everyone was talking about them back then because that was new technology that they had a chance to showcase during that war. Is that, oh, we're going to take out this specific building and leave all the other buildings around it completely intact, right? Which is something that was not possible before. Before you just throw a bunch of bombs and hope that your bomb landed in the right spot. And so in the 90s and in the 2000s, America was definitely ascendant. There was really not only that, but in the 90s, I think 1994 or 95, there was actually a budget surplus. Bill Clinton actually balanced the budget. That was
Yeah, it was last time.
that was
Yeah.
the first and last time in my lifetime, at least, that it happened. So, but we're no longer in that phase of our lives, right, where we can afford the luxury of giving the U.S. government the benefit of the doubt. I think because so much has come out about their sort of surveillance culture, the graft that is occurring behind the scenes. I mean, case in point. And we can switch to the next topic here, which is what I wanted to bring up with you is Robert Kennedy Jr. is running as a presidential candidate for the Democratic side. and he was recently on the All In podcast, which I know that I listen to, and it gets quite a lot of traction in people from DC. And I listened to the whole thing a few days ago, and he definitely has some interesting positions. He has positions I don't necessarily agree with in some respects. I think he's a bit too anti-vaccine for my liking. He sort of just thinks vaccine cause all sorts of problems. I don't know that science is as clear on that, but one of the things that struck me is that he is actually polling fairly well in some of the primary states like New Hampshire and Vermont and those places that do primaries relatively early. And there's a lot of people that are happy with some of the things he has to say. And he's also like an accomplished environmental lawyer as well. Like he's not just like sitting around just talking to people about how he's a Kennedy. He actually has had a successful career as an environmental lawyer, and he sued Monsanto and those other kind of companies. So he's been an active political player to some extent. But what really struck me and what kind of pissed me off is that the Democratic Party is already saying that they are not even going to entertain the idea of doing debates or holding primaries or doing anything that would help any other candidate on the Democratic Party side at all. They're like, nope, Biden said he's running, and that's just the end of the matter, and we're not really interested or concerned about any alternatives. So it really does strike me as rather strange that a party, not even a party, a collection of party elites have decided for us one of the two candidates of the president of the United States is going to be, and they're not even going to entertain any kind of an alternative candidacy at all. I mean that just strikes me as very undemocratic. And not only that, but I think we both know. And again, I'm not a right-wing person at all. I think I'm like you. I'm a moderate person. But I think it's very clear that the main reason they're doing that is because I don't really know that Biden can hold his own in a debate, right?
No.
Especially against somebody who
No.
is a bit more well-informed and can, rightfully criticize some of the policies that Biden has been behind over the last 2 or 3 years. How is he going to really legitimately like rise to the occasion with the debate right now? He's going to have to debate the Republican challenger at some point as well, but I guess they're going to think, well, cross that bridge when we get to it, right? But they definitely don't want to blow things up in the primaries, at least, right? So they're like, no, protect him from, and you probably saw or heard of this as well. Like there was this photograph that was released of Biden when he was calling on reporters, and he basically had a list of not just the reporters' names that were going to ask him the questions, but he also had the actual questions written down on the list of paper that he had. So this is a news conference where he's supposed to be going up against the free media, who can ask him theoretically any question they want to ask, and yet the questions were pre-selected, pre-approved. He was told what they were going to be, so he had plenty of time to be given the answers as well. And I look at the totality of this, and I'm like, is he really like running the show there, or what? Like, is he really in charge? And why aren't they allowing challengers? Like, this is the presidency. You should be happy to be challenged. You should be happy to have your ideas criticized or discussed. And I don't see that happening. What is your take on sort of this collection of events? Of the fact that they're sort of just being so protective of Joe Biden, and what do you make of Robert Kennedy Jr. As a candidate as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a Biden fan. To slightly defend him, it is a pretty, TV time's expensive to get all the journalists in there and stuff. So I know it is like even back to like Clinton, it is kind of normal. You have Bobby from Fox, you have Rachel from CNN. It's like, oh, hey, like XYZ happened. We want to ask them this. So they make sure those people get their questions in. It's good for camera, clickbaits and stuff. But to your point, I've seen stuff on Twitter, and it's Twitter, so I take it all with a grain of salt. But same thing, I've seen not even the one you're mentioning, but months ago I saw one where someone you could see on the table there was a piece of paper, and then there was another paper that looked similar, and same thing was like, oh, Bobby, Rachel, Samantha, and with the questions. And again, it's like, I think this is the problem with it. If that was anyone else like Trump or Bush or Obama, people would be like, okay, they're just kind of prepping them, time's short. But the fact that Biden can't go upstairs, he's shaking hands with ghosts, he's just like mumbling over himself. People are like, wow, is this guy so gone? Is he that much of a mummy that they literally need to wipe his ass for him? And like to your point, it's like this is the freeder, like the leader of the goddamn free world, you know. So it's just like optics. It's anything else, you know. It's same thing too. If Elon invested $2 billion in a tech company and it turned out to be just vaporware, for lack of a better word, people be like, "What the hell, man? You're a tech guy." But let's just say he invested in some farming shit and he lost his ass. Like, well, you're not a farmer. You're not. So you get my point. So optics are everything. With that said, like you, I did not see the podcast with Kennedy Jr., but I haven't been following him on Twitter recently because about maybe it was even a month ago, Peter McCormick had a gentleman on, and they were just same thing, went on a political thing, and he's like, "Oh, have you seen the whole thing with Kennedy Jr.?" And he's like, "No," and then they mentioned it, and then about 2 weeks ago, he had Jeff Booth on, who I'm a very big fan of for a variety of reasons. And then they talked about it too. And then I was like, all right, let me check this guy out. And I went on Kennedy Jr.'s Twitter page. And the first thing I had pinned, or he had pinned, was basically him doing for lack of a better word, a rant of just about why he's running for president. And it wasn't even, part of it was the COVID stuff. But the biggest thing is basically what, like, part of the reason we have this podcast and the meetups and we talk about this. For lack of a better word, money runs the world. The best, besides democracy, one of the best inventions we have made, even though it is flawed as humans, is this thing called the open market free capitalism. And like we've said, when you start gerrymandering that, it fucks up wars, fucks up social movements, destroys the middle class. It just is overall not good for society. And he basically talked about how the U.S. government, for lack of a better word, the last 20 years has been running a Ponzi scheme. And he basically went step by step how they were doing it. And I remember, like, I got to the bottom of it. I was like, fuck me, that is like what a fucking president sounds like. Now, I've heard he's a little quacky from some other people. I haven't seen the anti-vax stuff you were talking about, but like I said, I saw some tweets too where he was criticizing the lockdowns, the money printed on Burr. With all that said, you know, just like with Elon Musk or anyone else, I am agnostic to everyone until they prove that they're at least not a dumbass. But like you, unfortunately, you know, going into our last presidency, you know, you had Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, even Pete Buttigieg, who I wasn't a fan of, but like you would listen to them and be like, okay, these are people with military, political, you know, government experience. Andrew Yang, he literally went around the nation for 10 years helping remake companies. Like that was his job, is to make jobs. It's like, oh shit, that sounds like a president. But it's just like these were sensible people. Even if you disagreed with them, they made intellectual arguments, and you're like, okay, that's a grounded person. And then they basically swept them aside and front run Biden. So to your point too, it's, you know, for a small moment, I was excited about Kennedy Jr., but then I was like, well, if they did this 4 years ago, what's stopping them from doing them with this guy? And to your point, it's like I think they're just going to keep the horses into the barn until they have to debate some Republican. But like you said, I think they're like, fuck it, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We're in the hot seat right now. Let's just milk it for every penny it's worth.
Yeah, you know, one of the strategies that a cynical strategy sometimes that the other party uses is that they try to actually promote challengers to the other party. So there's a conspiracy theory that, well, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory, but people are saying that the prosecution of Trump, you know, I think he was recently arrested for, I don't even know what they charged him for, but he was arrested for something.
Yeah, sexual assault or something weird.
No,
yeah,
that was
I'm not up to date either.
that was the civil case. So you got sued by somebody, and that person won $5 million in a judgment, in a jury judgment. That would just happen 2 days ago. But remember when he was actually arrested, you know, he was actually arraigned and everything. There was a grand jury in the state of New York. I think it might have been something to do with business fraud or whatever it was.
Was that the concealed thing? Yeah, I remember something was concealed or whatever. They didn't have it. I don't know if it was that.
I don't
Again,
remember.
like haven't kept up with that.
Yeah, I don't remember. And
that's the thing.
Even,
There's so many. There's so many at this point.
and I don't even care that much because the point that I was making here is that there's a number of people that are saying that these maneuvers are deliberate and they're actually aimed at boosting Trump's popularity, because once he got arrested, his sort of campaign donations like went through the roof. So it actually worked out really well for him. And the cynical, people, or maybe they're the realists, they're saying that this is actually deliberate. The Democratic Party wants Trump to be the nominee in 2024 because they feel like they have a good chance of beating him a second time. They beat him the first time, they can beat him a second time. So they just want, what they feel is a beatable candidate because they probably feel Trump is past his prime or he doesn't have the kind of hold on the Republican Party that he used to have. He's also old as well, so let's not forget he's also in his, I think he must be hitting 80 at this point as well. And so the reason I bring that all up is, RFK Jr. is running in the next, in the months to come. To what extent is the right-wing media or the right-wing pundits or, the forces of the Republican Party going to artificially try to promote RFK Jr. so that he creates enough of a distraction for the Democratic voters so they may actually try to split the vote, right? So, people say that sort of happened in the 90s with Ross Perot, who was running on the sort of libertarian side, and he sort of siphoned off a lot of the Republicans because he was talking about, balancing the budget and cutting expenses. He was very much a, sort of Republican kind of candidate, but he ran it as an independent, and people felt that he took a lot of votes away from George Bush Sr., who otherwise would have won had it not been for Ross Perot. Anyway, I mean, that's just a theory. But, people try to split the vote that way where they get a candidate that may be able to take votes away from the other main candidate of that party. And I'm kind of wondering if RFK Jr. will be that person. But the interesting thing is that I could see him appealing to both sides of the political divide. I could see him appealing to Republicans, and I could see him appealing to Democrats as well. So it would be very interesting to see. I mean, he got a very big platform by being put on the All In podcast. It is a pretty widely viewed podcast. A lot of people in Washington, watch up. It is becoming more and more influential. And I think that they were making a point. I think they themselves, the All In podcast people, and we, this is kind of circling back to the whole thing we started this conversation off with, is the media has become decentralized. The All In podcast, folks who are, let's be clear, I enjoy the podcast, but I kind of hate watch it a lot of the times also because except for Friedberg, in my opinion, all the other three just have these giant egos who are more than happy to leverage the podcast to be able to fulfill whatever political agendas they have. I think Chamath has his own personal agendas. David Sachs definitely has his own political agendas, and if they can leverage the podcast to try to promote those agendas, they're definitely going to do that. So I think that they put him on the podcast just to promote themselves to some extent, but also to demonstrate that they have some political power now because they can elevate the voice of a candidate for the presidency and take part in any campaign that may be going on to act as a spoiler against Biden, which, is something, to be honest, that I would welcome at this point. I think that the Democrats should be sweating for every vote. They should have to earn every vote. And that it should not just be given to the incumbent just because he was, he just happens to be in the White House. I think, honestly, I mean, I really do think the time has come for the apple cart to be upset, for some person to get in the White House that knows how to use a fucking, email, provider, that can write their own emails. And, that's not Trump and it's not Biden. I mean, we need we need fresh blood in this. If the 2024 election ends up being about Trump and Biden, man, that just seems so depressing, is that in 4 years, our political system has not been able to come up with better candidates than the last two clowns that were running for election, and that's just really sad. I mean, do you have predictions about, where this is all headed? I know we're still really far away, but I think things are going to go into the swing of things after this summer. So I think everyone is sort of battling manning the battle stations right now.
No, they really are. That's a great analogy for it. I remember I was joking with you and some other buddies a while ago. This was probably back in March, and God, we blinked. It's already been 2 months. But I was like, yeah, enjoy the quiet while you can. In fucking 6-9 months, everyone's a political pundit. And to your point, it's maybe 100 calendar days. And like you said, the battle axes are swinging. But what you just said, it's kind of it's definition of insanity, doing the same thing, expecting different results. We're almost 4 years later, and it's shit, this is round 2 with these idiots. But, wasn't a fan of Trump. But one thing he talked about, you can make an argument, I would agree with a lot of the left, that he talked about drain the swamp. He was part of the swamp, which maybe he was down the street swamp, but nonetheless, but I mean, too, swamps are thick, they're hot, they're humid, they're hard to get your way through. And, I just think, what am I trying to say here? externally, again, someone that's not into politics, I think a lot of it is a sham, for lack of a better word. Please show me any amount of unity that's happened in the last 4 years. You could argue that everything's gotten more polarized, and same thing too. It's I think I saw something, Biden's at a 32% rate positivity rating, which is the lowest ever. I didn't fact check it, but if you're batting at 30%, that's, I mean, can you imagine if you were the CEO or a board on Apple, you had a 30, man, they get your ass out of there in 2 seconds, man. But it's like, same thing too. It's like, even if he's at 30%, it's just like my mom, my aunt love him to death. They're like, Biden can't tie his shoes, but he's not Trump. And then, even some people are like, fuck, if DeSantis doesn't win, at least Trump knows what room he's in. And that's my point. It's like, part of me is frustrated, but it's like, just look at the, since Biden took over, just all the fallout post COVID that's happened, and then the money printer more, and then they've raised rates and shit's blown up, and average American doesn't feel better. So my point is, the political divide has gone worse, and I'm like you, I'm frustrated. But it's kind of just like I said, it seems like different day, same shit. And the only thing I will say on top of that, that gives me some hope, though, it's like like we joke about, part of the reason this podcast Decentralize This is that you fix the money, you fix the world, but you can also I think a lot of things. One thing I do push back with the Bitcoin maxis, I think again, I hate this word, hyper Bitcoinization is kind of gonna be one of the last things to get done. I think a lot of little micro things are gonna get solved first with decentralization. And we're seeing in the news media, for example, God, in 26, no, because I was probably in Miami at that, or I guess I was going to 2018, but 2017. Part of the reason I figured out who Andrew Yang was, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and then same thing too. Lex is a really big voice. It wouldn't surprise me if he had a couple political people on the next couple months. And I don't know if you follow a gentleman, he's out of Fort Lauderdale, Patrick Bet David, but he basically offered Tucker Carlson a $100,000 contract for
million.
5 or 7 years. Yeah, exactly. Or sorry, what did I say? 100,000? Yeah, 100 million. But same thing too. It's like, just between those three people alone, and then some other podcasts, it would not surprise me if there was some data you could resolve that it's like part of the upcoming election could get swung big time. Like if Kennedy Jr. went on Rogan, Lex, besides any other podcast, but then Patrick David, that could be enough to swing it too. So I guess my winded point with that is the vehicles are in the road to help get us out of this fucking two-party craziness that are just, like you said, this Trump Biden round two we've been stuck in. So the vehicles are there. Unfortunately, I don't know if the mass consumer, I know it's a bad word to talk about voters, but if they're just ready to make that jump, because like I said, there's a good argument the last 3-4 elections, it's not what candidate do you like more, it's which candidate do you despise more. And like we've talked about this, if you do anything based on fear and negative emotion, that's a horrible way to run your life with your significant others, work, anything else. But for some reason, out of 300 million idiots, we decide to run our political elections off that. So like I said, the last 4 years have just been nothing but more polarizing. I do think there's vehicles in play with decentralized media, from the Rogans to the Lex Friedmans. But I'm like you, in 9 months, if it was basically cemented that it's Trump Biden round two, I unfortunately wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, no, I think you make an excellent point, and we sort of harped on this on the last podcast we did, is that the decentralization of the media might actually, for the first time, play a really huge role, right? I mean, if you in the past, you would have these newspaper publishers like the New York Times endorse a candidate, right? They would write an editorial and like, we endorse so-and-so, and these are the reasons why. And that would be the official, the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times or whatever, pick your thing, would have an official endorsement of a candidate. And that was their way of sort of, trying to sway opinion. What happens if that starts happening with a series of influencers, right? And I would even put Elon Musk in that list as well, because even though he's not a writer, he doesn't have a show or anything like that, he does post a lot on Twitter, and he definitely drives the conversation. What happens, for example, if there's an online grassroots decentralized campaign to lift up a certain candidate or to try to sway the election one way or the other? What happens when Joe Rogan comes out and says, I endorse XYZ? Lex Friedman does the same, Sam Harris does the same, and then people start getting their cues, not from mainstream media, who have absolutely no credibility, according to the polls, but the Joe Rogans of the world and the Lex Friedmans of the world, and you pick your favorite podcaster. I mean, Tucker Carlson now is moving into that space. If you think about it, Tucker Carlson has joined the the realm of decentralized media now. And it'd be interesting. The timing of this is very interesting because this is the ideal time to be to be a popular, unshackled political commentator, because we have an election coming up in whatever it is, a year and a half or whatever, right? A perfect time to exercise as much influence as is possible. Because I think what Fox was trying to do, they have Tucker under a contract for the next 2 years, is like, okay, we have a contract on you. Let's just shut this guy up for the next 18 months or 2 years, because we don't want him to be playing in this sandbox when the elections are coming, because we need to control the narratives. If Trump is running, if Trump becomes a candidate or DeSantis becomes a candidate, we can't have Tucker Carlson on Fox News saying things that are not friendly to the candidate of our choice, right? And again, this is not in defense of Tucker Carlson. I personally don't actually like the guy, but I do acknowledge that he's extremely influential, and a lot of people do like him and listen to him and think he's like Jesus or whatever. And there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to try his very best to become a political operator or influencer of some kind. And of all of them, he actually may have the largest sway. I mean, you must have seen yourself that when Tucker left Fox News, like a whole bunch of people stopped watching Fox News, right? They left as well.
It was their alpha show, right? It was Tucker
Yeah.
was like 70% of the views or something like that. Yeah, he was the guy, yeah.
Yeah, if he, for example, does a show and now it's a long form show and he starts interviewing candidates, like this Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, is another the Republican candidate in the running, who's making some waves. He's getting some traction. He's really big on Twitter, even has a podcast himself. He's really highly energetic. He's also one of the the youngest candidates who's running. He could catapult to fame if Tucker Carlson decides to sit him down and do a series of 1-hour interviews. If he gets on Joe Rogan, if he does all these other things, these guys end up getting a lot of traction, because I think a lot of people are looking for alternative sources to media. And they're going to these sort of venues, like the Tucker Carlson video, which is a 2-minute video that he made on Twitter. In like an hour, it had 1 million views. Like everyone, the people watched the entire thing in 1 hour. That's like, those are like prime time, CNN numbers.
Oh yeah.
Anderson Cooper would kill somebody to get those kind of numbers for his own show, and Tucker just put some bullshit like video up there on Twitter, and it has it easily beats those numbers. So you finally have a scalable sort of platform to give a voice to these decentralized media sources in a way that can be highly disruptive. And I think one of the one of the stories that is talked about least, I think, in the next that may play a very big role in the next 18 months is to what extent these decentralized media outlets are going to be influential in swinging very important things like an election. I think we're all going to find out in the next several months. All right, my friend, I think we got to the end of the lists of topics that we settled on. Are there any other sort of things you'd like to talk about before we sign off for the week?
We don't necessarily need to talk about this, but one thing I was thinking of even before this, like we were getting our list and like we were kind of talking, I remember probably 2 months ago, like kind of, we were still kind of in the tail fallout of just a lot of the crypto debauchery. And then obviously there was, some barking in DC about crypto and stuff. And it's kind of funny, man, like we said, we haven't done an episode in about a week and a half, some change. And it's just like so much shit has hit the fan since then. And part of me going into this podcast was thinking, well, it seems like everything's taken on water right now, but like at least it's not the crypto boat anymore. It's like we're still going sideways, but it seems like all the crypto negative, bills and news, or all the negative outlook is out of the news right now. So I was like, all right, maybe we might be able to escape an election without crypto being the whipping boy for everybody.
Well, one of the things I do have to say is that I'm still optimistic about the price of Bitcoin. I don't know about the other cryptocurrencies, but it is remarkable that it has held all of the gains of this year. It's May now, like we're entering, the middle of May, so we're 5 months in, 4.5 months into the year. The first quarter is behind us, and Bitcoin is holding about 70% of the gains that it's accomplished this year, and it's not really seeming to want to go down. And I think that is very bullish. Again, I'm still in the camp. Maybe I just drink my own Kool-Aid a bit too much, but of the camp that there's a growing cohort of people who are looking at crypto and Bitcoin as an alternative to the fiat system, and that's how they're looking at it. It's like, okay, the government is screwing everything up here. Let me invest some money into a decentralized monetary network with no counterparty risk, which I think really has become, I mean, basically Gold 2.0 narrative is taking hold. And so, I think as the possible default of the U.S., government looms closer.
Looms, yeah.
Because I don't think we're going to be solving this week or next week. I think these jokers are going to leave it to the last minute. Unfortunately, each side is going to try to, play a game of chicken for as long as they can. And as soon as one side or the other blinks, each side is going to declare victory. It'll be a hollow victory for everybody. There's no winners in this situation. But I think as this ridiculous turmoil unfolds, as a spectacle unfolds, people are going to look at Bitcoin. I'm like, there has to be a way out of this system, this monetary system. And my hope is that more and more people will learn that Bitcoin is, that alternative. At least that's my rose-colored tinted glasses perspective. Time will tell if I'm right, but I still do think the bottom is behind us. I think it's sideways or up only from here on out. But, what do I know? I'm just a guy on the internet. I don't know anything.
No, I hear you like there, man. I definitely don't think it's rose colored. Like I said, I'm still holding on to that 10K Bitcoin. Maybe a couple months ago, I was at 50%. Now I'm kind of beat up, down 25%. But like we were just saying, man, you can listen to Bloomberg, CNBC, Peter Schiff, Lynn Alden, and the biggest thing is like no one knows what the hell is going on. 6 months from now, and like you said, these idiots in DC have let's call it like 3 weeks on the dot, 21 calendar days until we default, and like you said, like they're probably gonna be doing that until the 11th hour, and it's like, wow, this is the best hope of humanity we got. So not counting all the other external stuff, it's like we don't even know if we're gonna have a budget come June 1st. So I'm like you, man, like no one knows anything. I was still real bearish on a lot of the macro stuff, but like to your point, I will agree. It's like with all the macro shit that's happened, the fact that we are still at 30K, we've hit 25K a couple times, and we come back and consolidate at 30, and I'm just like, one thing I will agree with you, like with the rose-colored glasses, maybe even if we kiss like 22 or 21, but then like by end of the summer, if we're back at 30 or 35, I might agree with you where this might be the floor, because like everyone listening to this knows we are a volatile market. If there's any way to go up or down, the market's going to do it. So if we consolidate for 6 months at one price, wouldn't say that's a clear signal, but it's like, we very rarely go sideways for 6 or 9 months. So to your point, if we close out the summer at 30K, I might, consolidate, get Isaac his beers and just be like, all right, this is the floor. But to your point, that's such a long ways away. Like we said, we don't know if by June 1st we're going to default with these idiots. But I guess, like I said, end on an optimistic note, like you said, we're holding well right now. See if the next 3 weeks we can keep maintaining that. But like I said, worst comes to worst, I know 5-10 years from now we're gonna be better off for it. But to your point, it's the rose-colored glasses are looking pretty good right now with all the macro shit going on.
Well, all right, let's on that optimistic note, I think we'll end it, and hopefully do another one real soon.
Yes, sir.
All right, man, always pleasure.